This video is brought to you by mybookie.ag. We are here for the UFC 286 predictions, headlined by Leon Edwards versus Kamaru Usman 3. Pretty solid card, man. Good fights throughout the whole thing. Even in the early prelims, you have good fights like Malcolm Gordon versus Jake Hadley, Jai Herbert versus Ludovic Klein, Muhammad Mokaev's on the card, Sam Patterson versus Yanal Ashmos, Jack Shore should be able to put on a good performance against Makwan Amirkhani, and of course the entire main card, except maybe the Jennifer Maia and Casey O'Neill fight, is just bangers, man. Amazing fights throughout the whole main card. Should be a really fun one, and let's go through the rest of the card before we get to the featured fights first, and I'm going to go through them very quickly. So Jennifer Maia versus Casey O'Neill. Not the most technical fight in the world, but two good flyweights who will try to stand up for the most part. Jennifer Maia might want to take this fight to the ground. She has a little bit more experience on the ground than Casey O'Neill does, but both fighters approach the fight in almost like a boxing mentality, where Jennifer Maia has a pretty good check left hook as she dips to her right and a decent right cross, which is actually pretty fast compared to Casey O'Neill's boxing, where she is going to be the longer fighter. She throws out a lot of 1-2s, sticks behind the jab more, and even some sneaky head kicks, which could potentially crash into Jennifer Maia's guard throughout the whole fight and maybe cause some damage through that. But Jennifer Maia seems to be a little bit faster on the trigger. Both fighters throw very similar punches, and I would have to ultimately go with Jennifer Maia due to her slight speed advantage. Her right cross seems to be more dynamic than almost anything Casey O'Neill throws. She is much more experienced and a little bit better on the ground if she wants to go that route. Jack Shore versus Makwan Amirkhani. I mean, it's a good fight for Jack Shore. Makwan is someone who's been around for a while. Hardcore fans are familiar with his name, but he's just not doing that great right now. He is 2-5 in his last 7 fights, only 2 wins in the last 3.5 years. And his last 2 losses against Jonathan Pierce and Lerone Murphy are both knockout losses in the second round. He does have a good submission win against Mike Grundy, who is a good wrestler, but when it comes to the stand-up, Makwan has nothing for Jack Shore. Jack Shore should be able to counter almost everything Makwan throws at him, press to action against him, and even threaten him with some of his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu skill. Makwan probably just has better wrestling, and that's pretty much it. Should be a good performance for Jack Shore. Definitely have him winning in that one. Chris Duncan versus Omar Morales is an interesting fight. 2 other fighters that approach it in a very much of a boxing mentality. Omar is way faster though in everything he does. He at least throws side kicks and stuff like that to mix it up a bit, but he trusts too much of like dropping his hands and moving his head around, and he can get caught doing that. Now, he is hard to hit clean if you're not setting up on him, and he can counter you with some good power, especially because of his speed. He can catch you off guard. Amazing check hooks and straights with his power hand, but he seems to be pretty easy to condition into shots, just like Uros Medic did. Uros Medic was throwing jabs at him and giving him the look of a right straight, and then use that to condition Morales to think that the jab was going to come again, and Medic just fired the straight right after he showed the jab. Caught him and dropped him. Chris Duncan doesn't really do too much of that. He's more of a guy who will just throw things in the open, head kicks out of nowhere, big hooks and stuff like that. He will go to the body and stuff, and honestly, he was getting tagged up in his Contender Series fight, and stylistically, it should be a bit back and forth, but I ultimately am going to go with Omar Morales because of that speed advantage and his better defense. Chris Duncan's defense was pretty questionable in his Contender Series fight. Sam Patterson versus Yanal Ashmos. This is a good fight. Sam Patterson is a 6'3" lightweight with a 78-inch reach. He is skinny, of course, for the weight class. He doesn't seem to be that strong physically, but he is pretty hard to handle because of that reach. I mean, he has a good jab. He will throw up knees and head kicks and stuff like that, and he has a nasty guillotine choke, which is the majority of his wins, actually. Some fighters who shoot takedowns on him get caught in that pretty quickly. He is 26 years old as well, so he's learning a lot, and his guillotine choke against Kamil Magomedov really showed what he's able to do if someone shoots a takedown on him, and Ashmos is a wrestler for the most part. He wants to take you to the ground. He wants to lay ground and pound on you, soften you up, and establish good positions and catch you with chokes if you present them. So I can see him getting caught a bit on the feet, but if he does wing out overhands and stuff like that, he could catch Patterson, who doesn't have the best guard. His chin is open a lot of times, and even when he's throwing punches, he drops his hands, and it's really scary to watch if someone is able to catch him. So I absolutely give Ashmos a really good chance here. It is almost an even fight for me, but Patterson is actually a massive favorite going into it, and I think that's a big mistake because Ashmos is a guy who gets finishes late in fights, showing a bit of his cardio there, and constantly going to the well with the same thing. The only thing that worries me about him is him getting caught by the jabs and head kicks, potentially knees as he goes in for takedowns, and caught with guillotines. If he's able to address those, he should be pretty good for the fight. So this is a pretty close fight. I can see how both guys can finish each other, but I'm slightly going to go with Sam Patterson because I think his reach and height will give Ashmos a bit of an issue, but I would not be surprised at all if Ashmos knocks him out with some big shot because Patterson doesn't defend himself that well. Muhammad Mokaev versus Rafael. This is a great fight. People that don't know about Filo, he absolutely has a massive chance of beating Muhammad Mokaev. He's a great boxer with a lot of power, shown in his Contender Series fight, chasing that left hook, showing really good confidence in his boxing ability, but he does have amazing grappling skills, good submission attempts. He doesn't defend the leg kick, that's a big thing about him, and Mokaev should definitely be the better wrestler, but Mokaev can absolutely get caught in something, and I ultimately think that the boxing difference between the two is going to give Filo a massive way of winning this. He has good kicks, good defense on most of the kicks thrown. Mokaev is a good kicker for the most part, but not the greatest with his hands. So honestly, in the stand-up, I can see where Rafael Filo takes over. The ground game is a bit iffy, it's a bit back and forth, and they are in fact having Muhammad Mokaev. Now Mokaev is pretty deadly when it comes to his stand-up because he throws a lot of crazy kicks and knees at you that can knock you out, and he comes out really heavy with them in the first round, putting a lot of pressure, but in the second round, when you saw in his last fight against Malcolm Gordon, he's not nearly as aggressive. A lot of his aggression comes out in the first round, and that's when Filo is definitely have to try to get out of that first round and into the second and start to impose his own striking. So I am ultimately going to go with Muhammad Mokaev by a decision. I think this should be a close fight. Definitely not an 8-1 favorite for Mokaev here. If you want a massive underdog that could potentially win here, Rafael Filo is probably your guy. Then we go into the early prelims. Lerone Murphy versus Gabriel Santos should be a good striking match, but Santos might attempt some takedowns here. Both guys are good kickboxers for the most part. Santos will throw some crazy stuff out there like spinning back fists, and he got dropped for that when he threw it against Marcio Barboza. And Lerone Murphy has some legit power. He's a big guy for the featherweight division. Definitely not someone you want to get too risky with, as he even knocked out Makwan Amirkhani with a knee on that takedown. And Santos doesn't have the best takedown attempts, right? He will definitely telegraph those before he shoots, but both guys are southpaw. I think Lerone Murphy has better fundamentals overall, so I do pick him to win this one, even though Santos I think is a better kicker. Christian Duncan, not to be mixed up with Chris Duncan fighting on the prelims, Christian Duncan, a middleweight, is going to be fighting Duško Todorovic. These two guys have very unorthodox striking styles. Duško is a bit more experienced when it comes to a higher level of the game. I believe he has better offensive fundamentals, lacking complete defensive fundamentals. Duncan throws his punches a little bit strangely, could catch him at weird angles out of nowhere. He does have some savage elbows in the clinch if he's able to get in there, but Duško moves so well, where Duncan is very plodding. I think Duško's movement with the kicks and some potential takedowns should win him this fight, even though it is a bit close. Jake Hadley versus Malcolm Gordon should be a really good fight where both guys are well-rounded, good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from both sides, good strikers for the most part. Southpaw Jake Hadley versus the orthodox Malcolm Gordon. I would say Malcolm definitely has more power. He reaches for his punches a lot more, which is also going to expose him for Jake Hadley's counter shots, who moves well. He moves on a linear line smoothly and should be able to find some of those counter shots there, but he has more of a textbook style, picks shots at you one at a time, throws good left hooks to the body and left kicks to the body, but I ultimately do think that his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, if he's able to get it to the ground, should get him the win here. Joanne Wood, I'm very used to calling her Joanne Calderwood, versus Luana Carolina. It's a fine fight. I mean, Joanne's been in the game for a while. She is 37 years old now and not doing too well, going up against a much bigger opponent who is coming off a horrendous loss to Molly McCann, getting spinning back elbowed in front of a loud crowd. But before that, she was doing pretty well against Paulina Botello and Lupita Godinez. Luana Carolina right now looks a bit more promising than Joanne Wood. It's not going to be the most skillful fight in the world, and Joanne was making a lot of mistakes on the ground, a lot of submission openings. So if Carolina is able to take the fight to the ground, she should be able to find something there. But even on the feet, because of her length and because of her awkwardness, she should make it difficult for Joanne Wood on the feet as well. So I'm going to go with her. Jai Herbert versus Ludwig Klein is going to be a very good stand-up fight. Klein has some insane head-kicking ability, man, and it's going to be hard to catch someone as tall as Jai Herbert with those, who is 6'1", and Klein is 5'7". Klein seems to have a bit better of striking mechanics, whereas Herbert has better movement mechanics, footwork, and all of that stuff. He is harder to hit, but he doesn't throw enough, in my opinion. He has some crazy head kicks himself that he could potentially catch the much shorter Klein with, and he's way more devastating in the clinch. That is going to be his spot. He needs to get into the Thai plum and start landing knees on Klein. Klein is going to throw in some whipping hooks and stuff, elbows flared out and everything like that with all the leverage possible. Can get pretty wild at times, but ultimately I'm going to go with Ludwig Klein because of his ability to kick so well. Southpaw versus orthodox is going to make it a bit trickier, but the open side on the body and the head should be there for Klein, and potentially leg kicks, which Jai Herbert does not defend that well. And then finally, Juliana Miller versus Veronica Macedo. I think it's Hardy now, right? Isn't she married to Dan Hardy? So for people that don't know, Juliana Miller was the last winner of the Ultimate Fighter. She is 3-1. She is really scrappy on the feet, puts a lot of pressure on you, tries to clinch you up, trip you to the ground, and is super quick on getting the back or the full mount. It can get pretty devastating with her ground and pound and her submissions. And the fact that Macedo is married to Dan Hardy, rip the ground game. No, I'm just kidding. But I ultimately do think that Miller's ground game will make the difference of the fight. I do like Veronica's Taekwondo style. She does throw some really nice kicks and stuff, but it's just more opportunities for Miller to get the fight to the ground because of her pressure. The pressure is going to make it hard for Veronica to throw the kicks that she wants, and it creates openings to get the fight to the ground too. So gotta go with Miller on that one. Now with that out of the way, the prospect of the night, I'm actually going to have to say is Rafael Filo, because Muhammad Mokaev is number 12. I don't consider you a prospect if you're ranked. So I'm going to have to go with his opponent, Rafael Filo. He is very well-rounded, great on the ground, good wrestling, good offensively and defensively, mostly on the feet. Besides for leg kicks, he doesn't defend those. He has a lot of power, good fundamental boxing, good offensive kicks himself. Just overall a solid flyweight who's also enormous for the weight class. The fighter of the night is the two guys in the main event, Leon Edwards and Kamaru Usman, coming out with a lot to prove here, and all eyes are going to be on both fighters there. The stake of the night, the fighter that needs a win here is Joanne Wood. Joanne is on a 3-loss streak, 2 of those by submission in the first round. She hasn't won since January of 2021, which was actually a solid win against Jessica Ai, but just can't hold a win streak. She wins once and then loses. She wins once again and then goes on a 3-loss streak. Now the fighters that she's losing to are really good. Alexa Grasso was her last one, and then Tyler Santos before that, then Lauren Murphy before that. You're talking about some of the best ranked flyweights and the champion right now, but she definitely needs a win here. If she loses one more time, especially gets finished by Luana Carolina, that might be it for a UFC career. She's also 37 years old, which is really old for a flyweight. The banger of the night, honestly, not only banger and fight of the night, is Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev. It has everything. It's technical, it's flashy, it's a vicious fight between two knockout artists. The only kind of fans that probably won't like are fans of wrestling. You're not going to see much of that here, or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, of course. But when it comes to a stand-up, technical, skilled banger, this is the fight you want to see, man. Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev. And with that, let's go right to our first featured fight, Marvin Vettori versus Roman Dolidze. This is going to be an interesting one between two good grapplers, slow for the middleweight division, but big guys nonetheless that could deliver with some good power. Roman Dolidze definitely has a power advantage, although he is a little bit slower than Vettori, which is very rare for Vettori because he's usually slower than his opponents. So it's definitely going to help him there. He's also the better wrestler of the two and potentially the better controlled Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist, but Roman Dolidze will dive in on you for those submissions, man. Even getting the better of Jack Hermanson with his grappling. Got his bag and just started wailing on him until a TKO finish. Now, he wasn't doing too well on the feet, which is promising for Vettori going forward. Right, Dolidze gets pretty wild. He doesn't really have good setups. He doesn't feint too much. His strikes are seen a mile away, but he does have some crazy power. Like, it's not the speed either, because power is force times speed, right? He has a lot of force behind his shots, but I definitely would expect someone with an iron block of a head like Vettori to take those. He has one of the best chins in the UFC. And the way Jack Hermanson took him to the ground, I mean, he shot in the double leg and turned that angle, and Dolidze did not see any of it, is pretty alarming, so I could definitely see Vettori doing something similar. Vettori can do that, but he also does like single legs to push you up against the fence. He has to watch out for the guillotine chokes there though. But Dolidze will start scrambling with you, trying to get your leg, trying to get your arm, whatever is open, he's trying to get it from you. If he submits Marvin Vettori, that is such a statement, man. If he's able to do that, he is potentially the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist in this middleweight division. But ultimately, I am going to go with Marvin Vettori, and I'm going to go by a decision win. I think he won't make as many mistakes. He is so experienced at this point. Fighting Adesanya, fighting Whitaker, fighting Paulo Costa, fighting guys at the highest level like that. I think he's going to finally return him some reward here in understanding how to capitalize on the openings that Dolidze will show him. And then we go to Gunnar Nelson versus Bryan Barberena. These guys are complete opposites in the way they fight. Bryan Barberena is a gladiator. He comes out there with fury to take you out. A lot of aggression, a lot of tenacity up against the calm, cool, and collected, stoic Gunnar Nelson, who will try to pick you off with a sniper of a right straight, trip you out, and smoothly and artistically cut through the transition and get your back. And I honestly think because Bryan Barberena will not cut off the cage the best, and he might be reluctant on getting super aggressive on Gunnar Nelson because Gunnar does have that right straight. He's knocked down so many guys trying to come at him with that. It's going to keep the fight in the center of the cage a lot more, and I think that's definitely going to favor Gunnar Nelson there. I think he's a much better point fighter than Bryan Barberena is. Barberena needs to push Gunnar back. He needs to get some pressure out there. and he has been showing better footwork than ever before, especially in his Robbie Lawler fight, moving and stuff like that, which is very different than what we saw in the past from him. So he is learning. But I ultimately think that Gunnar Nelson's right straight, potentially some really good kicks as well. His movement's going to be better than Bryan's. He's going to get away from any kind of pressure, in my opinion, unless he gets like intercepted by a hook or something trying to get out. And ultimately on the ground, he's just so much better at everything. So I am ultimately going to go with Gunnar Nelson, and I'm going to go by a 3rd round submission. I think Bryan Barberena is really tough and should be able to stick in there for a while. And then we go to the best fight on the card. Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev. What a fight, man. I cannot wait for this. I've been calling for this fight ever since Fiziev defeated RDA, and we're finally going to see it. This could potentially be one of the greatest lightweight fights in history if both guys are on point and goes down the way we think it's going to. Justin Gaethje has a very wonky style. Like, he has a lot of power, he is skilled, but he throws shots awkwardly, and it's going to look a lot more awkward because he's fighting someone like Fiziev, who is so perfect by the textbook. The guy is the pure Muay Thai fighter you want to see in the lightweight division. He's that guy. One of Gaethje's best punches is that left hook, but he throws it like almost slapping at your face. Elbow is never flared, but it's almost like too inward at times. And it's crazy how he's able to generate that much power in a punch like that, whereas Fiziev's left hook is perfect in form. He's also much faster than Gaethje in everything, from takedown defense to throwing kicks to throwing punches to defense and all of it. He is faster than Gaethje on everything in the game, and he's better technically when it comes to his form. The only thing about Fiziev is sometimes he can get a bit too aggressive and expose himself. This showed a lot in the Bobby Green fight. He got way too excited, blew his wad, threw out too many stuff when he shouldn't have. It made the fight a lot harder for himself. If he does that against Gaethje, I could see him getting caught and dropped. Right, he's also been knocked out before. His only loss in his career, he got knocked out by Magomed Mustafayev, and that was pretty nasty, but that was his UFC debut 4 years ago. He was a young man back then, right, 26 years old then, with only 6 professional fights in his career. Now it's a completely different story. He's pacing himself a lot better, he's picking his shots a lot better, and this show definitely against Rafael dos Anjos and against Brad Riddell. That version of Rafael Fiziev is going to be so hard for Justin Gaethje to attack, because not only will Gaethje potentially get beat to the punch in every exchange, his leg kicks are also going to get defended. Gaethje does his best work when he's able to land his own leg kicks. When he's not able to land them, he kind of needs you to fall into his punches, just like Charles Oliveira did. Oliveira did the best job on evading the leg kicks. He was lifting his leg above the kicks, causing them to go through, and now Gaethje doesn't have a means of measuring distance that well. He kind of just needs you to run into him, and that's his measurement for distance. Fiziev doesn't do that, right? Fiziev is an excellent kicker and should be able to do the same thing that Oliveira did. Check the kicks, or just lift his leg above him, or just move away because of his great footwork. And from there, he should be able to pick Gaethje apart from the distance with his body kicks. He's able to switch stances on you very well, potentially land some spinning kicks up top but not throw them early, condition Gaethje to fall into those, and use his hands in order to bait out Gaethje's counter shots, which he gives a big tell when he does it. You know when Gaethje's going to try to counter you. He lowers his stance sometimes and leans forward. When he does that, you know he's ready to counter with a right overhand / right straight or a left hook. Sometimes he'll throw a jab like he did against Tony Ferguson, but Tony was running so much into him, the jab is right there for the taking, you know? But these big telegraphs for counters from Gaethje should be a big hole for Fiziev to exploit, and he should be able to kick at Gaethje's legs really well. The biggest issues for Rafael Fiziev are being too aggressive, trying to get in there and go for the knockout and get too excited because of the crowd or something like that. And number 2, he does sometimes make big defensive moves, like big head movements, slipping huge, dipping to his sides and stuff, and he could potentially get caught doing that. But the big reason why that might actually be good against Justin Gaethje is for the fact that Gaethje throws big punches usually. He doesn't really set things up too much. A lot of his punches are big, so a reaction to that is big defense as well. So it could actually work against Gaethje better than it worked against Bobby Green, Brad Riddell, and RDA, because those guys will actually set up their shots and throw a lot more smaller strikes at you compared to Justin Gaethje. So ultimately, my prediction for this fight, I'm going to go with Rafael Fiziev, and I'm going to go by a second round TKO. Another big thing to note here is Justin Gaethje got dropped badly by Charles Oliveira and said he's never been hit like that in his entire career. Now, does that mean that Oliveira hits harder than anybody, right? Does he hit harder than Michael Chandler? Maybe, maybe not. It could also mean that Gaethje's chin is finally breaking. If his chin is not the same after that Oliveira fight and after all the wars in his career, Fiziev might put him down early in the fight. So I'm going to go with Rafael Fiziev. I'm going to go by a second round TKO. I think Gaethje is tough enough to go into the second round like that. And I think the distance work, if Fiziev is able to defend the leg kicks, should be really good for him. The body shots are definitely going to be massive for him because Gaethje does block up really high, exposing his body, and he is somewhat susceptible to body shots, shown in his Eddie Alvarez fight, so that should be big for him. And Fiziev should be able to land to the legs as well, eventually coming up to the head, and beat him to the punch when it comes to his speed advantage. So I am going to go with Fiziev. And then we go to the main event, Leon Edwards versus Kamaru Usman 3. What do we really say about this fight, right? We've seen it twice already. We've seen a very similar pattern in both fights where Kamaru Usman was able to take over not only because of his threatening power with his hands, the volume that he throws with his hands combined with the pressure, but also because of his takedown threat as well, combined with that, you know? And that's always going to be true. The only thing is if like Leon has just complete changed with his confidence, like his confidence at an all-time high and approaches the fight completely differently, but Leon's style has never changed in his entire career, at least like the way he approaches a fight. He will give ground to you. He's not a guy who pressures you too much unless you yourself are moving back willingly, like Bilal Muhammad did. If you're not moving back willingly, he doesn't really pressure you that much. Even Nate Diaz was able to put it on him, and Nate Diaz will sometimes move back away from you, shown in his Conor McGregor fights, even against an old Tony Ferguson, who didn't put that good of pressure on him either. Usman is a guy who puts the pressure on you. He's going to be wanting to push you back, and it's still going to be a bit of an issue for Leon in this third fight, and whenever that Usman pressure is presented, takedowns against the fence are always going to be there too. And Leon better have worked on his like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu offense, you know, trying to get guillotines and stuff like that, trying to defend the takedowns. But in the last two fights we've seen, in years in between each other, Leon is still not able to defend a lot of takedowns. Usman was still so successful with his wrestling. It's a big problem for Leon, probably even still today. And Leon was constantly giving up his back to get up from the bottom. If Usman did some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training, if he put on the gi or train with some BJJ guys in preparation for this, he should be able to get the back because it's a glaring hole. The amount of times Leon was giving up his back to stand up, knowing that Usman never goes for any Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in fights. The guy never tries to get your back, never tries to choke you out, never tries to get an arm bar or something like that. Leon knew he's able to do that against Usman because Usman's not going to capitalize on it like a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter would. It'd be ludicrous for him to get up like that against someone like Gilbert Burns, or potentially even Jorge Masvidal, or anybody who has some lick of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Usman and a lot of those guys in the same camp of Trevor Whitman, if they didn't come from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu like Rose Namajunas did, they just don't have it. That is honestly one of the biggest things going for Usman in this fight. If he can capitalize on getting that back, this fight should honestly be much easier for him than any of the others. But if he didn't, and he just allows Leon to keep standing up like that, Leon always has a chance to knock him out, whether in the clinch, potentially with the knees, right? If he can get the tie plumb and land elbows and knees and stuff like that, that changes the game on Usman a bit, which is actually something a lot of fighters don't do against wrestlers. I actually want to see how that would be utilized against that style. But even in the feet, when it comes to like the center of the cage, Leon is always going to have a chance to knock him out. He could potentially try something the same way, fake the left hand on the southpaw stance, throw up the left high kick, maybe it lands a second time, or potentially land something else, right? Get kind of creative with his combinations there and make something land, because in the center of the cage, when it comes to technique, Leon has Usman beat all the way around, besides maybe a jab. But the thing is, Usman can still catch him with that 1-2, just like Nate Diaz did. And for the exact same reason we even see today from Leon. When he throws a check hook, his arm is all the way out to his side. There's a big opening, a big window down that center to catch him. And Usman could definitely hurt him with a 1-2, potentially just even a jab, you know? A good jab from Usman can drop you. One of the most effective jabs in the sport. From either stance too. He could throw it from southpaw, he could throw it from orthodox. Doesn't really matter. He has a lot of power in both of them. But the thing for Usman is he needs to put more pressure. He cannot back up away from Leon. In order to get away from his strikes, he actually has to get in on him, right? Not get away. Unless he's like far out and getting in is a little too risky. That's a different story. But if he's already in kicking range, he actually has to get in more. Because when the head kick landed in the second fight, Usman was actually backing away a little bit, inch by inch, which is actually complete opposite of what his game plan should have been. He went away from it just for a split second. It got caught in the center of the cage, which is somewhere he should never stay with Leon. And then comes the psychology about the fight. How is Leon going to handle becoming a champion? How is he going to handle that kind of spotlight? And, you know, the trash talking that Usman was giving him in the press conference too, maybe that got to him because he did throw some zingers there, and Leon did look like it may have affected him a little bit. Hard to really tell when it comes to the psychology of a fighter. We got to really know when the fight happens. But he didn't have a good response, like for Usman telling him, you know, the fans are rooting for you, they're rooting for London. And Leon was kind of like flabbergasted at it. He didn't even know what to say about that because he knows some of it's true. Looking back in his career, his support now ignored him his entire career. Even when he fought in London, fought in Manchester, whenever he would win, the crowd rarely ever praised him or supported him, right? They supported other fighters like Darren Till, etc., like other guys from the region, but for Leon Edwards, he never got that kind of respect from the fans, but now all of a sudden he's a champion, now they're all on him, and of course that's to be expected for any champion. So it seems like he knows some of it's true of what Usman was telling him, and maybe that kind of stuff is going to sit in the back of his head. Not only that, Leon constantly brings up the whole headshot thing, shin to the head and stuff. I hope for his sake, he's not defining himself by that moment. For a guy that got everything he wanted in a flash knockout like that, in a fight he was losing, a guy who was counted out by so many people around the world, it could become very easy for him to define himself by that moment. And it's the reason why he always references it. Every single time, it's become like who he is. Leon Edwards is the headshot guy, the guy who knocked out Usman in the second fight, when he should be much more than that. So when it comes to the psychology, there are some interesting things going into it. We don't know for sure, but Usman probably has the mental advantage when it comes to handling things like that, considering how experienced he is at the highest level, how much of a legend he is in the sport. Now, the other way around, maybe Usman's not coming back right after that knockout. Maybe he's not the same guy. Maybe he doesn't know how to handle that kind of knockout loss. He's in a position he's never been in before. And he is older, taking a knockout like that and coming back. So there are some X factors going into it when it comes to the psychology, but ultimately my prediction for this fight, I am going to go with Kamaru Usman, and I'm going to go by a 5th round TKO due to ground and pound. And that brings us right to our sponsor, MyBookie.ag, where you could definitely capitalize on these odds. A ton of big favorites on the card, and we talked about Muhammad Mokaev being a massive favorite, the biggest favorite on the entire card against Jeff Alfilo, and he grew to a minus 900. So he was minus 800, now he's minus 900. You can see how quickly it changes, and a lot of people don't know much about Filo. He is very capable of upsetting that fight. But even though Mokaev should still win, considering that he is overall the better fighter, it never hurts to put something on those kind of odds. As you can see, Juliana Miller is pretty much a lock against Veronica Hardy. Really good style there. I think she's a good favorite to win that fight. I probably would stay away from Jai Herbert and Ludwig Klein because anything could really happen in that. Joanne Calder was actually a favorite, even coming off a 3-loss streak and all of that. So it's an interesting one. I am going Luana Carolina, but this is another fight I probably would stay away from because it's all riding on Joanne's age and her confidence, and both of those things are really hard to gauge. Jake Hadley's a massive favorite, minus 416. I definitely see him winning, but not by that much. That is a bit too much of a favorite in my opinion. Christian Duncan's actually a big favorite against Dushko Todorovic. I do have Todorovic winning this, but it can be a rather close one. If you think Todorovic should win, the plus 171 are good odds. The minus 222 isn't too rewarding for Christian Duncan, but if you think that Duncan is going to hit that weak chin, you could definitely ride with him on that one. Lerone Murphy and Gabriel Santos is another fight I probably would stay away from. Competitive fight, can go back and forth and really hard to know exactly how it's going to go down. Sam Patterson's a big favorite against Yanel Ashmos. If you're looking for another potential upset, this is another one you want to probably do a little bit more research on. There's not a lot of fight footage on Yanel Ashmos, but off of the few fights you can see, he for sure can defeat Sam Patterson. Not only on the ground, but even knock him out standing. Omar Morales and Chris Duncan is another fight I probably would stay away from. Very competitive, it's pick 'em. If you are confident in one of these two guys winning, for sure jump on one of those. But if you're not too confident, I would stay away from that one. Jack Shore, massive favorite. I think he's a lock. Marvin Vettori is a massive favorite. If you're riding with Roman Dolidze, those are really good odds to jump on. I probably would jump on him quickly before they change. But I do think that Vettori should win that fight. I don't know if those are good returns though. I'm minus 277. I don't know if he's actually a lock, but I do like his chances. Casey O'Neal's a sizable favorite against Jennifer Maia. That's interesting. I think Jennifer Maia has a really good chance of winning that fight. Gunnar Nelson, I think, is another lock on the card. Rafael Fiziev is a pretty big favorite. Good odds on Justin Gaethje if you think he's going to get the upset. But this fight might end with a knockout. Now, you're probably wondering, but the Michael Chandler fight didn't end by a knockout. But Chandler's really, really wild, and he could miss a lot of his punches. Fiziev is probably not going to miss when he fires. So if you want to ride with Fiziev or Gaethje, you either want to go, of course, by a decision or knockout. It's more likely that these two guys would win by knockout. It is riskier to pick the method of victory, but that is one way you can go about it to get better odds. And Kamaru Usman's a big favorite against Leon Edwards. If you're going for the second upset for Leon, trying to win as much money as possible on him, those are good odds to bet on, man. And him to win by a knockout is plus 540. Usman to win by knockout is plus 300. And the only minus is Usman winning by a decision, which is the most likely way he would win the fight. So this is a card I actually think there's a lot of locks. You could even put up a parlay with these fighters to multiply your earnings, and make sure when you go on mybookie.ag to use the deposit bonus. Well, they'll match up your first deposit all the way up to $1,000. That means if you put in like $20, they'll give you another $20 to play with. In order to activate this, use the promo code WEASEL, that's WEASLE, and of course with that is going to come the rollback withdrawal requirement that most sites have. But MyBookie has some of the best and most reasonable rollback out of any of them. Make sure to visit mybookie.ag today where you can win big. And that is ultimately the end of the predictions, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure to give the video a thumbs up, and if you enjoyed my content, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video, which is probably going to be the podcast.